additional expanded Medicaid for the states.
Peter Suderman, senior editor at Reason Magazine. Here's the piece, Down the Drain. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
That's all for Washington Journal today. We'll see you at 7 o'clock Eastern Time tomorrow. Let's go to the House floor.
The House will be in order. The chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., May 15, 2013. I hereby appoint the Honorable Mo Brooks to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 3, 2013, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each, but in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, this week the House will be voting for the 37th time to repeal the Affordable Care Act. This vote comes at a time when we are facing serious and pressing challenges, one of the most important of which is the operations of the sequester. 37 votes to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Let us set aside for a moment the important issue of how health reform is working and making quality care accessible and affordable for more Americans. I'll be speaking more about that from this floor in coming days, as I know some of my colleagues will. What I find, and I believe most Americans find, incomprehensible is that how this House could waste its time on such a blatantly partisan vote when the effects of sequestration are having a growing negative effect on our economy and on the lives of so many American families. That ought to be our focus this week and every week until we find a solution, Mr. Speaker. Now, Speaker Boehner has said that this 37th repeal vote is justified because freshman members have not had an opportunity to vote on that issue. If that is his view, then, by the same reasoning, he should allow a vote on a balanced alternative to the sequester. Freshmen have not had a chance to cast their votes on whether to replace the entire sequester with a big and balanced solution to deficits. If the House proceeds with a vote on repealing the Affordable Care Act on the grounds that members deserve an opportunity to be on the record on such an important issue, surely, Mr. Speaker, we also ought to have a vote on replacing the sequester, which we know is having adverse effects on our economy and on our national security. American families and businesses are facing greater and greater uncertainty as the results of the sequester and the unwillingness on the part of Congress to take a meaningful bipartisan action to stop it. With this uncertainty, businesses have slowed hiring and in some cases have even begun to lay off workers. This indiscriminate and irrational nature of the sequestration means that its ill effects will be felt across our economy and society without regard to our priorities. It also means that none of us, not one of us in this chamber, are immune in our own districts where constituents will see reduction in services and dislocation. Because of the sequester, we are at risk of 70,000 young people kicked off Head Start, 10,000 teachers' jobs at risk for Title I cuts, 4 million fewer Meals on Wheels for seniors, 600,000 women, infants, and children dropped off the rolls, emergency unemployment insurance cut by 11% for 2 million out-of-work Americans, 2,100 fewer food safety inspections. That's a drop of 18% to make sure that our food is safe. And 1/3 of combat air units are grounded. The responsible path forward is for Democrats and Republicans to work together on a big and balanced approach to deficits that restores certainty to our businesses and families. Four times, Mr. Van Hollen, the ranking member of the Budget Committee, has offered an amendment to the sequester which would get to the same deficit reduction, but in a way that was prioritizing those things that are important in our country and eliminating those that are not and raising some additional revenues as well. Four times. Not only has that not been considered, but the Republicans have refused to allow that amendment on the floor. Yet we have the 37th time to repeal the health care bill, a 37th vote to repeal health care reform, which is already benefiting millions of Americans. It's not a responsible use of congressional time. I urge the Speaker and the Republican leader to cancel this repeal vote and get back into business by allowing us to consider a balanced alternative to the sequester this week. I also urge them to bring to the floor a motion to go to conference on the budget. My Republican friends pleaded for the Senate to pass a budget. The Senate passed a budget. We passed a budget. Regular order is going to conference, where we could, in fact, come to an agreement on a big and balanced deal to replace this negatively impacting sequester. Nothing on the schedule to do that, either to repeal the sequester and change it or to go to conference. But a 37th vote that will go nowhere, and everybody knows that to be the case, is on the floor this week. How sad. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Riddell, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, in this great country of ours, since our founding, we've always had a distrust of government. And quite honestly, I think that's a healthy thing, most especially today, as we learn about what both the Department of Justice and IRS have done. What we are learning is that this is a threat to your First Amendment, freedom of speech. And let there be no question, the order of importance when it comes to your very first in your Bill of Rights, freedom of speech. Now, I believe that these rights are so sacred, so precious, that I'm introducing the Free Flow of Information Act to protect journalists from the prying eyes of this federal government. It is my hope that Republicans and Democrats alike will support this, just like then Senator Obama did in 2007. A select few in these agencies represent the worst when it comes to a heavy-handed government working to shut down your basic right to speak out as an individual or report the news as an organization. Now is the time that we stand up and say, our society is not about I, the federal government, it is about we, the people. And to quote my generation's music, from Public Enemy to Rage Against the Machine, we got to fight the powers that be. We've got to take the power back. And so, in other words, we need to stand up and say that we see the abuse from a few in Washington. We must return the power back to the people. After all, Washington works for you. Not a party, not an ideology. Your government, elected and unelected, works for you, not against you. But now we clearly see that both the IRS and Department of Justice are working against you, working to stifle, to shut down your God-given right of freedom of speech, that freedom often carried out by the press. Now, in the United States, we are so unique and so powerful because we really share a common belief of some pretty simple things. You should be able to speak your mind. Again, it's called freedom of speech. And journalists should be able to do their job and do so without the fear of a heavy-handed, tyrannical government threatening or stifling them. It's called freedom of the press. But now we see an entire culture of government acting on their own behalf, not even beholden to an administration, party, or even a belief. Their own ideology. These are rogue agencies that we're talking about, unelected, unchecked, without boundaries, without ethics, and without a shred of respect for the Constitution or you. These individuals are some people on some floor of some building named after some dude that you've never even heard of, messing with your life. And if you don't think that wiretaps or IRS audits are going to hit you, think again. 2 groups from my home in Southwest Florida were hit so hard by the IRS that they quit. They shut down their groups. That was it. Enough is enough. Now, this is the clearest example of how the government is coming after you to strip away your most basic rights. These groups were really made up of hardworking Americans just like you. Their goal? To teach people about the Constitution. Now, think about that for a second. They wanted to teach people about the very document that tells you you have the right to say what you want. They're now gone. And let's look at the Department of Justice, wiretapping, seizing, and prying into the lives of journalists. I worked as a journalist for almost 20 years, living with what I thought our government also believed in, freedom of the press. The freedom to investigate, share, and speak out on injustice. And from journalists to partisan pundits, Rachel Maddow to Bill O'Reilly, they're coming for you next. Sean Hannity, Chris Hayes, you'll be tapped next as you try to shed light on truth, on injustice, or just try and get some answers. Where does all of this end? Well, this is where the so-called far left and far right need to embrace each other. Whether you are a Tea Partier or part of the Occupy movement, this is about you. Whether you are an evangelical Christian wanting to share the Word of God or an atheist simply asking for a more secular society, this is about you. This is about you, your freedom of speech, your ability to express what you believe in. This is about you. Washington insiders should not be dictating your life. The more it's about them, it's not about you. The more government grows unchecked and unbalanced and out of control, the more it's about them and not you. I believe in you. Stand with me and let's take the power back and return this government to we the people. I promise to stand with you. Mr. Speaker, I yield the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields. Members are reminded to direct the remarks to the chair, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Miller, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, little more than 100 years ago, a New York State Assemblyman was an eyewitness to one of our nation's worst industrial tragedies, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. He recounted how he saw girl after girl appear in the reddened windows, pause for a terrifying moment, and then leapt to the pavement below to land as a mangled, bloody pulp. He said it went on for what seemed like a ghastly eternity and described how the firemen's life nets were torn by the impact of the falling bodies. This inferno at a sweatshop garment factory in New York City employed mostly poor immigrant women. 146 workers died that day because it lacked proper stairways, fire escapes, and managers had locked all of the exits. This tragedy shook our nation and led to life-saving workplace safety reforms. A century later, I recently met a young Bangladeshi garment worker named Sumi. She, too, jumped from a window of the Tazreen garment factory. She survived, but 12 of her co-workers who jumped with her did not. More than 100 others who never had the opportunity to jump were found inside of the factory dead. This haunting tragedy has many parallels to the Triangle fire. Exit doors were locked, fire extinguishers were not working, fire codes went unenforced. We don't tolerate those workplace conditions in the United States anymore, but those are deadly conditions that are tolerated in other countries that make the clothing that we wear. These tragedies have moved from New York to Bangladesh, driven by business models and global supply chains of the world's leading retailers and clothing brands. But now Bangladesh has had what might be its own Triangle Shirtwaist fire. On April 24th, more than 1,100 people died in the Rana Plaza in its garment factory as its garment factory collapsed. Some 2,000 more were injured, and rescuers are still pulling bodies out 3 weeks later. There have been an additional 40 fires, explosions, and other incidents between the Tazreen fire and the Rana Plaza tragedies. It is simply a matter of time before there is another one. These incidents shocked people around the globe and laid bare the need for bold action. The lives of 4 million workers in these factories are counting on bold action. But not everyone has been shocked. Major American retailers and clothing brands have refused to change the way they conduct business in Bangladesh, the second largest garment producer in the world after China. They are hoping instead that the heightened attention that this will pass without having to change their business model. That business model pits sweatshop against sweatshop, country against country, in a race to the bottom to rake in billions of dollars in profit while paying as little as 22 cents per shirt. In Bangladesh, American and international companies flourish in this system. Companies we all know, like Walmart, The Gap, JCPenney's, and The Children's Place, just to name a few. They refuse to accept responsibility. So what can be done to improve the Bangladeshi factory safety? Certainly there are things the local government can do. Address corruption that allows unsafe, dangerous structures. Enforce safety codes. Defend the right of workers to form unions and to be able to have the workers refuse unsafe work. Bangladeshi government is scrambling to implement limited reforms, hoping to keep the industry that is critical to its economy. But only the retailers and the brands can put a floor under this race to the bottom. The economic power rests with them. That is why the announcement this week by major European companies and one American company that they have signed a binding and enforceable fire and building safety agreement for Bangladesh factories is so significant. H&M, Zara, Primark, C&A are to be applauded for the unprecedented and bold steps. And they have been joined by only one American company, Philips Van Heusen, which has Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger among its brands, and one major German retailer. But now, El Corte Inglés, Marks & Spencer, Mango, Benetton have also agreed to sign this enforceable agreement. The agreement provides for independent safety inspections with public reports, mandatory repairs and renovations, money to fund the necessary safety upgrades, the right of workers to refuse unsafe work, and the vital role of workers and unions. This agreement is truly unprecedented. But where are the other American companies? Where are the American retailers? Where are the American clothing brands? Where is Walmart? Where is JCPenney's? Where is The Gap? Where is The Children's Place? Their silence in the face of this tragedy is inexcusable. They should sign the binding safety agreement and protect Bangladeshi workers. They should sign it now. Experts estimate that the safety improvements under this plan would cost about a dime a garment, a dime for the life of these women. I urge all Americans to join in demanding that the American retailers and the fashion brands stop selling their blood-stained levels and sign the enforceable agreement to protect these Bangladeshi women.
Time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Brooks, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the President and Senate Gang of 8 amnesty bill is not only bad for America, it is a disaster for American workers who are pitted against millions of illegal aliens in the competition for scarce jobs. On April 24, 2013, Dr. Frank Morris, former executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and now leader for the African American Leadership Foundation, stated, quote, "The Senate Gang of 8's immigration bill is not only impractical but immoral. Increasing immigration levels through amnesty and new visa programs, particularly at the low-skilled level, will flood the labor market with millions more people, leading to higher unemployment, more poverty, and a lower standard of living for many in the black community," end quote. Dr. Morris is right. Amnesty undermines millions of African-American workers' incomes and job searches by flooding the American market with cheap labor. In an April 23rd news release, the African American Leadership Foundation stated, quote, "Blacks have an unemployment rate nearly twice that of the national average. The Senate's immigration plan to drastically increase the immigrant workforce will continue to keep that number high," end quote. Dr. Morris emphasized that illegal aliens have huge advantages over American job seekers. Again, I quote, "Immigrants are the preferred employees because they are more vulnerable. You can cut them out of overtime. You can cut them out of safety measures. You can cut them out of anything, and they have no recourse," end quote. Charles Butler, also of the African American Leadership Foundation, added that the amnesty bill would, quote, "provide green cards and residency benefits to illegal aliens when many Americans are hurting the most. What makes sense is for America's jobs to be reserved for people who are legally entitled to compete for them," end quote. In 2007, T. Willard Fair, president of the Urban League of Greater Miami, emphasized that, again, I quote, Amnesty for illegal workers is not just a slap in the face to black Americans, it's an economic disaster. I see illegal immigration and the adverse impact that it has on the political empowerment of African Americans and the impact it has on the job market, end quote. How bad does illegal immigration hurt American workers? Harvard professor George Borjas found in a study released in April 2013, and I quote, illegal immigration reduces the wage of native workers by an estimated $99 to $118 billion a year and generates a gain for businesses and other users of immigrants of $107 to $128 billion, end quote. Who is hurt the most by illegal aliens? American workers who lose $99 to $118 billion in badly needed income. Who is helped the most by illegal aliens? Employers who pad their profits to the tune of $107 to $128 billion when they hire illegal aliens over Americans. Dr. Borjas adds that, quote, immigration has its largest negative impact on the wage of native workers who lack a high school diploma, a group that makes up a modest share of the workforce. These workers are among the poorest Americans, end quote. Who do American workers compete against for jobs? Per a 2010 Pew Hispanic Center study, 7.8 illegal aliens hold jobs in America. That's 7.8 million job opportunities that would be opening up for American workers if the President would enforce federal immigration laws. The way to help our blue-collar and low-wage workers is not to flood the market with illegal aliens. The way to help America's blue-collar and low-wage workers is by denying American jobs to illegal aliens, thus forcing blue-collar wages up and helping workers and their families pursue the American dream. Mr. Speaker, we must return American jobs to American citizens. The White House and Congress should be fighting for American jobs, for American citizens, not jobs for illegal aliens. Mr. Speaker, I cannot in good conscience ratify illegal conduct with my vote. And I hope other elected officials in Washington will represent Americans seeking jobs, not foreigners illegally on American soil. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Chu, for 5 minutes.
Last month, Galway Central School District in New York considered outsourcing the roles of their school psychologist and social worker. After all, budgets are tight, and what harm could come from this? Andrew Huszar, the district psychologist, and Christine Borant, the school social worker, had already faced an uphill battle helping their students. Although the district has only 900 children in attendance, Galway is geographically one of the largest school districts in New York State. And as the only school psychologist and social worker, Andrew and Christine struggled to meet the needs of their students, facing more than double the recommended ratio of students to mental health professionals across the district. An onslaught of letters and testimonies soon flooded the Board of Education as students, parents, and teachers alike protested on Andrew and Christine's behalf. The board soon relented to the public outrage, perhaps thanks to a very moving letter of support that Andrew received. This letter was from a young student explaining that he would not be alive today if it had not been for Andrew intervening in his life. This student was not someone Andrew saw regularly. They met only 3 times the previous school year. Mental health counseling is a critical component for student success. Just 3 meetings were enough to save this student's life. As a clinical psychologist, I know that there is no budget cut more short-sighted than one that stands between mental health resources and those who desperately need them. For a student, that access may be the difference between a productive day in class and an act of aggression against themselves or their peers. In the case of Andrew and that student, it made the difference between life and death. That's why last week I introduced the Partnerships for Achieving Student Success, or PASS Act. It does more than ever before to help our nation's neediest schools ensure that our children have access to the appropriate mental health and student service professionals on campus. It creates a federal grant program to help low-income school districts recruit, employ, and retain school counselors, school social workers, school psychologists, and other psychologists qualified to work in K through 12 schools. Galway School District ultimately kept their mental health professionals, but not every school district has the capacity to do so. By expanding the number of school mental health professionals in low-income, high-need schools, we can affect positive change in the lives of students who need it most. That's why the PASS Act already has the support of the American Psychological Association, National Association of School Psychologists, American School Counselor Association, and the School Social Work Association of America. And it is why I take to the floor today to encourage my colleagues to support this bill and improve the academic and life success for students across this country. Together, we can make sure that the Andrews of this world are there when their students need them.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Royce, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to condemn the systematic and brutal enslavement of women during World War II by the Imperial Government of Japan. What is known today as comfort women is in reality a state-sponsored program of sexual brutality against 200,000 women from Korea, China, Taiwan, and the Philippines. The fact that women and girls as young as 13 years old would be forced into this kind of misery is appalling. It runs counter to every recognized international norm against human dignity. Anyone seeking to justify or deny the existence of comfort women is ignoring history. The sheer amount of evidence regarding this terrible time in history is staggering. Not only are there documents chronicling the existence of comfort women camps, but there is also the gut-wrenching testimony of survivors and of eyewitnesses. Countless governments around the world have come to the conclusion that, yes, the Imperial Government of Japan did indeed condone this most reprehensible of actions during World War II, along with such brutal violence as the rape of Nanking. That is why I rise today to condemn the unfortunate remarks of the mayor of Osaka, Japan, who as recently as yesterday denied the existence of comfort women. The mayor not only questioned the existence of comfort women, but he sought to justify the use of, quote, a comfort woman system, unquote, as a means to boost morale for the military. The mayor's remarks are absolutely outrageous, and it adds insult to injury for survivors and their families. The rise of ultranationalism in Japan is very worrisome, and as chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I strongly condemn it. Mr. Speaker, the House went on record in 2007 to express our outrage regarding the forced enslavement of 200,000 women during World War II. The civilian populations of Korea, China, Taiwan, and the Philippines suffered so much from the imperialism and aggression of the Imperial Government of Japan. We speak with one voice when we speak against grave violations of human rights. It is in America's interest that we continue to press for justice and to never forget. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Carson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this week the House is voting to repeal the Affordable Care Act for the 37th time. In every congressional district, there are seniors, new mothers, young children, low-income families, and young adults just starting out on their own. Do my good Republican friends really want to take away their chance for better health? I would never do that to my constituents, which is why I'm here today, Mr. Speaker, to say again I am proud of my vote for the Affordable Care Act. Recently, I had a chance to spend some time with some Hoosiers across my district, and I heard again and again their worry about rising health care costs and their families' ability to access care. Fortunately, millions of Americans no longer have to worry about accessing care because of the Affordable Care Act. Instead, more than 500,000 Medicare beneficiaries in Indiana alone received free preventive services in 2012, avoiding more costly illnesses. More than 17 million children with pre-existing conditions nationwide are no longer being denied insurance coverage. More than 100 million Americans no longer face lifetime limits on coverage. Mr. Speaker, and over 360,000 small businesses have already used tax credits to help insure 2 million workers. By the end of this year, health exchanges will be set up, making it easier for people who don't have insurance to choose the coverage that best suits their needs. And next year, we will happily welcome even more consumer protections. Insurance companies will no longer be able to place lifetime limits on coverage. Discrimination against pre-existing conditions will be banned for all Americans. This means that when a woman notices a lump under her arm, there is no reason for her to wait until she finds a job to schedule an appointment. And she doesn't have to wait to get sicker, costing more of her time off from work and away from her family. Under the Affordable Care Act, Mr. Speaker, she knows she can obtain potentially life-saving care right away. The same goes for her spouse, her parents, and her children. Our health care system benefits us all. It benefits us by allowing us to make investments in lower-cost treatments and prevention now, rather than expensive therapies later. Of course, I know that the times are tough right now, and we have to be even more careful about the mandates we put on businesses. But my good Republican colleagues seem to forget that people have to be healthy to contribute to our economic growth. As a representative of many hardworking families, Mr. Speaker, I have stood here time and time again over the past few years to extend a hand to anyone who wants to work with me and us to provide quality health care for all Americans. Today, I make that very same offer. I will work gladly with anyone who wants to improve our health care system and ensure that all Americans have access to quality and affordable health care. I call on my Republican colleagues to work with us to implement the Affordable Care Act and start improving it. It's time we all stand together, Mr. Speaker, and start looking out for the health of this great nation. Without it, we have nothing. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Whitfield, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to express in the very strongest terms possible my disapproval of a pattern of conduct of the Obama administration that is of great concern to all of us. A pattern of conduct in which this administration rewards its friends and punishes its opponents. Now, when our founding fathers wrote the Constitution many years ago, there were some basic principles in that Constitution. One was equal protection under the law, and the other was protection from discriminatory practices. Well, we all know about the IRS being accused of going after groups that they disapprove of. And today and late yesterday afternoon, 2 more incidents arose that shows that this administration is about punishing their opponents and taking care of their friends. The first incident revolves around the Environmental Protection Agency. There is a system in the federal government called the Freedom of Information Act in which individuals, groups, other entities can request the federal government to obtain information about regulations, things that the federal government is doing, and if the group asks for a waiver of fees to obtain that information, they can obtain the information free. Well, because of a lawsuit filed by the Competitive Enterprise Institute, we now find out that EPA routinely grants fee waivers to its favored left-wing groups who demand a more intrusive and powerful EPA, but systematically deny waivers for free information from any group that EPA disagrees with. In fact, the headline says EPA gives information for free to groups it agrees with 92% of the time, but it denies fee waivers for groups that it disagrees with 93% of the time. We cannot afford a government that systematically goes against groups that it opposes and yet rewards groups that it favors. I want to give you another example that came about yesterday. More than 573,000 birds are killed by the country's wind farms each year, including 83,000 hunting birds such as hawks, falcons, and eagles. Now, nearly all the birds being killed are protected under the federal environmental laws, which prosecutors have used to generate tens of millions of dollars of fines and settlements from businesses, including oil and gas companies, electricity generators, over the past 5 years. As a matter of fact, BP Oil Company was fined $100 million for killing and harming migratory birds during the 2010 Gulf oil spill. And Pacific Corp, which operates coal plants in Wyoming, paid more than $10.5 million in 2009 for electrocuting a number of eagles along power lines and its substations. And yet, this administration has never fined or prosecuted a wind energy company, even those that flout the law repeatedly. Instead, the government is shielding the industry from liability and helping keep the scope of the deaths secret. So there is clearly a double standard in this administration. If you kill an eagle and you happen to be a private business, or you're a power generator, or you're an oil company or a chemical company, you're going to be fine. But if you're a wind energy company, even though the bird you kill may be protected under the Endangered Species Act, you're going to be protected. America will not stand for a government that rewards its friends and punishes its opponents in this indiscriminatory and discriminatory fashion. And with that, I yield back to balance my time.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, for 5 minutes.
I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to acknowledge the 4th anniversary of the end of the Civil War in Sri Lanka on May 18th, 4 years ago. Although the war has ended, and all of those who care about the well-being of this country are indeed glad and delighted. However, there remain high levels of suspiciousness among many Tamils who still feel that they're being denied equal rights, equal protection under the law, and are being treated as second-class citizens. A large number of Tamils fled the country, left their homelands during the war, and many have not returned to their homes. And while peace is present, but there still exist many hard feelings. Therefore, I urge that the government and the Tamil community find as many ways as possible to promote peace and live in harmony with equality, equal justice, and equal protection under the law. And so I thank you, Mr. Speaker, wish the country well on its peaceful coexistence, and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Puerto Rico, Mr. Pierluisi, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, today, joined by a bipartisan group of my colleagues, I am introducing the Puerto Rico Status Resolution Act. This bill is a response to the results of a referendum held in Puerto Rico in November. The first question asked voters if they support Puerto Rico's current territory status, which deprives my constituents of the most fundamental democratic rights. 54% said no. The second question asked voters for their preference among the three alternatives to the current territory status. Of those who chose an option, 61% favored statehood. More voters said they want Puerto Rico to become a state than to maintain the current status, which is unprecedented. The White House has recognized the importance of the results, which is why the President is seeking an appropriation to conduct the first federally authorized vote in Puerto Rico's history, intended to resolve the territory's future status. The legislation I'm filing today is consistent with the President's budget request and serves as a blueprint for how the vote conducted pursuant to that appropriation could be structured. After outlining the rights and responsibilities of statehood, the bill authorizes a ratification vote on whether Puerto Rico should be admitted into the Union as a state. If a majority of voters affirm Puerto Rico's desire for statehood, the bill provides for the President to submit legislation to admit Puerto Rico as a state after a reasonable transition period. The bill also expresses Congress's commitment to act on such legislation. Now, I want to speak directly to the men and women who voted for statehood in November. Our movement has become the predominant force in Puerto Rico. Every day, we grow stronger. Like you, I believe that justice delayed is justice denied. And like you, I find it difficult to be patient. But we fight with our heads as well as our hearts. Perfecting our union requires passion, but it also demands perseverance. There are no shortcuts on the path to statehood, and politicians who suggest there are leading us to a dead end. The statehood movement is powerful because we're united by a single principle, the principle of equality. The November vote has fortified our spirit and renewed our sense of purpose. We will not shy away from a fight. History teaches that once the people have chosen democracy, self-government, and progress, they are unlikely to reverse course. Rest assured, now that the people of Puerto Rico have withdrawn their consent to second-class citizenship, the question is not whether, but when Puerto Rico will obtain equality through statehood. To my colleagues who represent states, I know you will respect my constituents for seeking the same rights and responsibilities as your constituents. This respect must take the form of concrete action. The U.S. citizens of Puerto Rico have made their voices heard, and they deserve a meaningful response from their national government. There is overwhelming evidence that territory status has affected Puerto Rico's political, economic, and social development. And it has become clear that the status quo does not serve the national interest either. The U.S. succeeds when Puerto Rico succeeds, when the island is strong, stable, and secure, and when its residents do not feel obligated to relocate to the states to achieve their dreams. From the U.S. perspective, a robust and resilient state of Puerto Rico would advance the national interest. The position of every president since Harry Truman has been that their administration would accept whatever status choice is made by a majority of Puerto Rico's voters. The U.S. government is a champion of democracy and self-determination around the world, and it must adhere to those principles with respect to its own citizens. This is especially true in light of the service that generations of men and women from Puerto Rico have rendered to this nation, most notably in the armed forces, but in so many other ways as well. In a very real sense, Puerto Rico has earned the right to be equal, and equal we will become. Puerto Rico has been called the shining star of the Caribbean. The time has come for our star to shine alongside the others on the flag of the United States of America. I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, early last year, I spoke with businesswoman Catherine Engelbrecht and also founder of True the Vote and King Street Patriots in Houston, Texas. True the Vote is a nonpartisan organization whose purpose is to train poll workers to uphold voter integrity at the polls. Because despite what many say, voter fraud is rampant in America. The King Street Patriots group is a group of individuals of liberty-minded philosophy. They're patriotic in Houston who meet weekly to discuss what's going on here in Washington. Catherine told me that both of these groups and her family had not only been harassed by liberal progressive groups, but also by the federal government. It all began when Catherine applied for nonprofit status in 2010 for True the Vote and King Street Patriots. So began the tidal wave of government inquiries and harassment. In a recent interview, Catherine said this: "We applied for nonprofit status in 2010. Since that time, the IRS has run us through the gauntlet of analysis and hundreds of questions over and over and over again. They requested to see each and every tweet I've ever tweeted, each and every Facebook post I've ever posted. They've asked to know every place I've ever spoken since our inception and to whom and everywhere I intend to speak in the future." We have learned that the IRS even has asked these groups, Mr. Speaker, for donor lists. Mr. Speaker, this level of detail goes well beyond the business of the IRS. And it didn't stop there. The federal government's snooping included 6 visits by the FBI, as well as multiple unannounced visits from OSHA, and yes, even the ATF. Mr. Speaker, you may remember the ATF. Those are the ones responsible for smuggling guns in Mexico. How ironic it is they want to audit American citizens but lose track of guns where they were purposely sent to the drug cartels. In any event, in addition to True the Vote, Catherine and her husband were also personally audited. Keep in mind, Catherine and her husband have owned a small family business for 20 years and have never been audited by the IRS until all of this. Why now? It seems very coincidental. I asked that question when I submitted a FOIA request on behalf of True the Vote and King Street Patriots to FBI, OSHA, and the ATF, asking if they were under criminal investigation. The reply from these agencies was that none of these individuals were being treated or under criminal investigation. Well, if they're not, then why are they being treated like criminals? Just because they question government. Mr. Speaker, Catherine is not alone. The IRS has admitted to systematically targeting certain groups who have opposing views from the administration. According to USA Today, between February of 2010 and May 2012, only one Tea Party group was granted tax-exempt status from the IRS. But during that same 2-year period, the IRS has approved dozens of liberal and progressive groups for their tax-exempt status. Coincidence? Yeah, right. Not only does this behavior of the IRS threaten individual freedom and violate the Constitution, I think it may be criminal. It is unlawful for any federal agency to use its law enforcement and its investigation power as a means to harass and target certain individuals whose political views differ from any administration. It would appear that such actions are also in violation of federal law and the equal protection and due process protections guaranteed in the Constitution. Private citizens should not be punished for questioning government, This is America, not a third world dictatorship or the Soviet Union. This type of government oppression and political opposition is disturbing. I've written Attorney General Eric Holder to request him to direct the U.S. Office of Special Counsel to investigate any potential violation of the Hatch Act that may have occurred by IRS employees. I've also asked Attorney General Holder to appoint a special prosecutor to investigate all of this. No government should be requiring citizens to furnish their schedules, donor lists, personal communications, or political beliefs to any government agency. No government agency, whether it's the IRS, the FBI, the ATF, or OSHA, should be used as a tool to suppress those who are considered opposition groups and dare to question our government. The IRS is abusing its power to tax by harassing and punishing those who have, quote, been taxed enough already. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today.
And when they come back at noon Eastern, 5 bills under suspension of the rules, including one